Our final presentation before we open things up for questions is from Dr. Stefano Semplici. He is the chairperson of the International Bioethics Committee of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. Recently released a draft report on the principle of non-discrimination and non-stigmatization. That report includes a section devoted to the neurosciences, which we look forward to hearing a little bit more about. Dr. Semplici is also professor of social ethics at Rome Tor Vergata University and scientific director of the University College Lamaro Pozzani in Rome. He is a member of the steering committee of many institutes and organizations, including the Institute for Philosophical Studies, Enrico Castilli, and the Center for Religious Sciences of the Bruno Kessler Foundation in Trento. Dr. Semplici is the editor of the Journal of Archives of Philosophy, a fellow of the Italian Society for Moral Philosophy, and the Center for Philosophical Studies at Gallerate. Welcome to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me and giving me this fruitful, wonderful opportunity to meet you and discuss with you such a relevant topic. I would propose a starting point, the general framework within which the IBC has addressed the issue of neuroscience, and then I would like to make 3 points which I consider particularly relevant for our shared commitment. The starting point is a quotation by Immanuel Kant, the well-known German philosopher, scrutinizing our hearts. Immanuel Kant considered God as the only one who had the ability to scrutinize the hearts of human beings. We know now that God is not the only one anymore, because there is neuroscience that to some extent opens new possibilities exactly to look at our brain working. And as it was correctly pointed out this morning, when we love, there is something that happens in our brain. When we hate, there is something that happens in our brain. Without the brain, no mind, which does not entail the conclusion that brain is everything we need to understand mind and to talk, to think about mind, which is something else. Why did the IBC decide to address this topic? The second slide. The IBC included a reflection on the principle of non-discrimination and non-stigmatization as set forth in Article 11 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights in its 2012-2013 work program as decided in Baku in June 2011. 6 illustrative examples were pointed out. 3 of them, tropical neglected diseases, HIV, and organ transplantation, are immediately related to the persisting challenges of poverty and social cultural faults of inequality. 3 of them, biobanks, nanotechnology, and neuroscience, can respond to emerging scientific and technological developments that could aggravate persisting problems or even create new versions of these problems. So this is a first very important clarification. Needless to say, and I think it was a quotation by President Obama, the one we saw this morning on a slide. Needless to say, the most important thing that neuroscience is about is to provide new tools to address and treat terrible diseases. Now we are talking about something else, not to reduce the importance of what I have just underlined, but just to focus on our specific topic. It was non-discrimination and non-stigmatization. I have no time to develop this argument, but I want to share this with you because it was the outcome of very long, fruitful, lively discussion among the committee. A preliminary clarification, it is a question, are economic inequalities a possible source of discrimination? The concept of discrimination entails the idea of a different treatment based on differences that should not be relevant, either in general or to some specific issue. Therefore, it depends on what we are talking about. It is not just about ability, specific characteristics of human beings. It is also about the context. For instance, if we have to decide to whom give a protecting cream against UV radiation, it is no discrimination to give this protection, to ensure this protection, to whom is more in need of it. That is, in this case, white people with red hair. So the context is relevant when we address the challenge of discrimination. And you can look at this is a quotation from our report. The lottery of social and biological life should not be grounds for disadvantages or advantages. Example of characteristics that should not be grounds for special disqualifications, harms and restrictions are sex, race, religion, political belief, national origin, or sexual orientation. In the case of healthcare and building on the awareness that material conditions of human life are pervasive factors in its improvement, Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of 2005 includes economic condition as a potential basis for discrimination not to be tolerated. Of course, it is about discrimination in a broader sense than it is usually conceived, but it is something that is worth getting a deeper insight. Now, I move forward to the 3 points I would like to make. Some dark sides of neuroscience. Evil as nature, evil or fragility as someone's fate, the stigma on the individual, enhancement as a commodity. Enhancement is something very relevant, and I think it should deserve more attention because it is likely to become one of the more challenging issues for our future. So the first one, evil as nature, I would make the point that well, the alternative is nature culture. Over these last decades, we shifted many things from nature to culture. Neuroscience is one of the domain of biomedical scientific development which prompts a new approach, a new insight, in the sense that we are invited to reconsider something like ethics before ethics. That is the grounds on which different ethics are being developed, determining the challenge of cultural pluralism that was already mentioned this morning. So nature culture is a first frontier of commitment, and we will probably obliged to face what we were not used to face anymore. For instance, this is an example that was suggested by our friend and colleague Jonathan Moreno, one of the members of the committee. For instance, the evidence or the possible evidence that something bad is not just dependent on culture, but has some deep root in our nature. Second point, evil or fragility as someone's fate. This is the very debated case of prediction. It is not necessary to develop the case too long, building on what is usually being said with reference to the human genome. We already know that. I would just draw your attention on a very decisive point, which is criminal law. The outcome of the necessary reshuffling of old concepts such as conscience, responsibility, and so on, will have a tremendous impact on our criminal law. On both sides, neuroimaging has been used in legal cases to assist in retrospective arguments about the defects that might have helped lead an individual to engage in a violent crime. We all remember Minority Report, I think. So the risk of a stigma on individual and maybe even of constraint before they commit some crimes they could maybe have the ability to. But on the other side, the possibility to use the outcome of this research in the sense of mitigating conditions for criminal law to be considered. So both these sides will be very relevant in our future, and we have to anticipate what will happen. And the last one, enhancement as a commodity. Let me conclude with a quotation by John Rawls. There is, of course, the issue of the legitimacy of enhancement as such, which is already a very controversial issue. I will not add anything about that. But there is also the issue that we could focus on according to John Rawls's second principle of justice. Social and economic inequalities are to be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Maybe we will have enhanced individuals participating in a public competition for whatsoever position may be in order to enter an academic activity. So the question is, should enhancement be something to distribute under conditions of fair equality once we accept that such an enhancement is legitimate? Something I have not said so far. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.